Hello, and welcome once again to another fun-filled heretical episode of Inside the World of Max Headroom. Um, Today I want to share my theory about what actually happened with the JonBenet Ramsey narrative. But before I go on, I want to tell you that I have kind of purposely avoided this whole story, primarily because I have a real hard time with those childhood beauty pageants. Now, anybody out there, I don't want to hurt your feelings. If you're doing it with your kid, good for you. I hope it's okay. But it really turns my stomach. And the idea of taking an innocent young 5-year-old kid whose beauty and whatever is supposed to be a representation of her innocence and youth, to dress her up with fucking makeup and a fancy dress and to have her be doing things like this, like Marilyn Monroe used to do and shit like that, just grosses me the fuck out. Okay, not to mention the fact that I am absolutely certain, after working for almost 30 years with pedophiles, that many pedophiles are using those beauty pageants for masturbatory stimulation. And the more a deviant person masturbates and climaxes to a piece of anything that can resemble a deviant child image, because of the reinforcement of an orgasm at the end, only gets closer and closer to acting out. It's like a form of passive rehearsal until it actually becomes real. So I got a real problem with those beauty pageants. Now, that's just my opinion. That's all, but I do. So I stayed away from this. It kind of nauseated me. Every time you went to watch a show on them, you got to see those little girls going like this. I mean, it was like gross. I mean, it grosses me out. So, and because of the social implications of those beauty pageants and stuff like that, in terms of what I just mentioned with pedophiles and masturbatory habits, I just never allowed myself to get into it. However, after doing the Madeleine McCann one-timer that I did on my last tape, I decided that I wanted to explore JonBenet Ramsey. One, because a friend of mine said she'd like to hear my angle on it, and second of all, because I noticed there's a lot of parallels. One's sort of isomorphic to the other. And it involves, suspicions of sexual abuse. It involves murder. It involves, alleged kidnappings or not, or whatever. They're very, the facts are very isomorphic. The parents are both in suspicion. So I decided I'd give it another try. And I did. And, sometimes the notion of keeping it simple is really the way to go. And so that's what I did. Rather than get embroiled in all these different theories and counter stories and this like that, I watched about 5 of them, and it just hit me. It just hit me. Now, I'm not telling you what it is because I'm the suspense man, but it just hit me how that poor little girl died and how that family coalesced together to make it look like it was something else. And it was really a piss poor way of trying to make it look like something else either. And I think the law enforcement also fell for some bullshit that was so obvious to me, and they're not trained in sexual abuse, so they don't know the right questions to ask. But I think in order to at least be in sync with me about why I've come to the conclusions that I have, and they are purely theoretical. I mean, really, I don't know. But it sure makes more sense to me than a lot of this other stuff that I hear, although it's kind of analogous to it, but it's not exactly the same. And I want to try to share that with you. But in order to do that, what has to happen is you have to make a paradigm shift. In other words, instead of using the paradigm of looking at the JonBenet Ramsey case in a forensic manner, which focuses on evidence and facts and behaviors and all that kind of stuff, you can't use that paradigm. Look where that paradigm took us with the Madeleine McCann narrative. It just made a shitload of people money and entertained a lot of people, and it's still being talked about 12, 15 years later. But did it ever solve anything? Absolutely not. But that's because I think it was being viewed very much in like a forensic sort of way. And I think that can oftentimes be a mistake, especially when you're suspicious of a family being involved in the death or the sexual abuse of a child. Even if they're saying they didn't do it, they're around that kid the most. They're going to be your first, concern. So I just got more and more intrigued with this, and I started to force myself past those beauty pageant parts. I even fast forwarded through a bunch of them. They're so gross. And I made this paradigm shift from trying to figure out, forensically what happened, which just generates, a plethora of theories, or could I take something that I already know? See, I don't really know forensics, but I definitely know psychology, I definitely know sex abuse, and I definitely know incest, and I definitely know the family structure of incest families. So, I spent years and years doing that. I wrote articles about it. Believe me, I know my shit when it comes to that. So as I was watching the various interviews and stuff like that, it just became so unbelievably clear to me using a family structure incest paradigm as opposed to a forensically oriented paradigm. You get where I'm coming from? Okay. So, you have to ask yourself, well, I don't want to go into this whole big thing because I could go into a whole big thing about the 5 basic family structures that comprise incest families. But that's a little too theoretical. But just trust me that there are very fixed types of families and very fixed ways of operating that incest families demonstrate. And once I started to make that shift and saying, well, let's pretend this is an incest family and let's start to listen to what everybody has to say, and then let's try to figure out, based on how I know incestuous families are structured, what I come up with. See the difference? Not let's look at the facts and the evidence. Let's look at what I know about these kind of people and these kind of families. So here's what I sort of came up with. First of all, you have to realize, probably everybody knows this, but, probably the most self-protective, homeostatic families in the world are those which involve incest. There's so much at stake concerning disclosure that everybody often participates in the concealment of the perpetrator. I think we all know that. With that in mind, if you start to take a look at the whole family dynamic, there's some things that are rather interesting. I'm sure everybody knows the story, which is really convoluted, like the kid's missing, and then some representative from the police or something comes over, and then all of a sudden they go down in the basement and mysteriously find her dead body. That's one of the most bizarre frameworks I've ever heard in my life, unless what I'm going to tell you happened. Now, yes, I am being a conspiracy theorist at this moment, but so what? So if you take a look at a couple of key characters, I think it makes a lot of sense, what I'm going to tell you. First of all, let's look at the father. He has been suspect by, just about everybody as being sexually abusive. And let's just assume he is, okay? But there's also another character in this family that so much intrigues me. And it's really interesting what intrigues me about him, because it depends when in his life cycle he was interviewed will cast a shadow of doubt or certainty about his role in this whole thing. And that is the son, whose name I don't remember. I don't really care to remember. I just know he's the only son. Now, I hope you all will just give me the freedom to just kind of share my experience of this young man. But if you watch the initial interviews, it's when he was really young. And, when kids are young, they don't they seem young. They seem immature. They seem, in some way limited, when compared to, let's say, most adult intellects, okay? So the kid seems, when he's doing interviews with the police and stuff, it just seems like he's a little kid and he's innocent and he's scared and he's talking and blah, 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 and you never bother to look at him. But then watch some interviews of this fellow when he's older. And I defy anybody to tell me there isn't a marked difference. Now, what's the difference? I hate to say it because people may say I'm being judgmental, but he appears to me to be developmentally disabled. I've watched his interviews over and over and over again. This kid has like every single type of affect that would be related to somebody who's intellectually impaired. His rate of speech, his blandness of affect, the time, the simplicity of his responses. See, when he was a kid, it looked normal. But when you watch him later, when he's like maybe whatever he was, 18, 19, I don't know, you start to realize this kid's very, very limited. And I think that's something you got to put in your breast pocket because I think it's a very important dynamic in the way this family operates. So here's my hypothesis. Boy, this is going to be a fast one. But here's my hypothesis. I got a feeling that old man Ramsey was sexually abusing this boy. And as so often happens in incestuous families, is that when one kid's getting abused, they start to act out on the other siblings. I mean, it happens all the time. Nothing new or novel about that. So I got a feeling that he was probably, he's considerably older than JonBenet also. So, I mean, I would say that he was probably being sexually abused by that father for a long time. But unbeknownst to the father, he probably sexually acted out with JonBenet. But JonBenet's a little girl. And, I mean, God, I hate to get so graphic, but could you imagine if a developmentally disabled person is attempting to, say, have intercourse with a 5-year-old kid? Could you imagine what an awkward predicament that would be and how the victim might really react? Like really, really scream and cry and whatever. And maybe the developmentally disabled perpetrator would react in a very self-protective way, which might lead to him trying to shut her up. Maybe he didn't want to kill her, but maybe he just wanted to shut her up so he could either finish what he was doing or not get caught or whatever, okay? So, what does a developmentally disabled person do? I don't mean to cast any judgment on people that are developmentally disabled, but they don't think so straight sometimes. So maybe he thought, well, if I grab her by the neck, she'll just shut up. Or if I put my hand over her nose and mouth, she'll just shut up. And she fucking dies. Okay? But being that, let's say he is developmentally disabled, again, this is all theoretical. It just makes sense. Everything's theoretical with this case because nothing's come out of it forensically, So, let's say the kid freaks out because he's developmentally disabled. He just realizes something happened. His sister isn't walking anymore. And he goes and runs to the father, right, who's been sexually abusing him and probably thinks, well, Dad sexually abuses me. I sexually abuse JonBenet. Dad must be an ally in this somehow, right? And maybe he found an ally because maybe he the father didn't want to get his ass caught for abusing the son. You see, and if it came out that the son abused the daughter and murdered her, well, then it's going to come out that old man Ramsey also has been having his pecker in the wrong place as well. So, my hunch is that they thought real fast. They got this kid to just, developmentally disabled people are often rather pliable. You can kind of infer certain things for them, and then they'll just kind of go along with it. Again, this is no judgmental thing. It's just the way it is. And of course, there's degrees of it too. But that kid, when I saw him interviewed as an adult, looked very limited. Very limited. Simple, straight answers, bland affect, taking him time to answer the question. It doesn't seem like he's intellectually very well endowed. So, let's say he goes to the father and goes, look what I did. Look what I was only trying to do what you do. Father freaks out And they get this kid to just say, this is what you're going to say, because you could get in trouble, or dad could get in trouble. And probably, I'm sure the mother was in on it somehow, So, because that's what sexually abusive families do, is they coalesce together. Even if it's against the victim, they will coalesce together in a self-protective manner to ward off the consequences of sex abuse. You see what they don't give a shit about the victim. It's more, the social consequences or the legal consequences or whatever. So let's say they just concoct this crazy story to stash the kid in the basement, call the cops, say she's missing, and then have the father, who'd probably be the least likely person as far as rationally to come up with a dead body from the basement, just but so happens there happens to be somebody from either it was from CPS or police. I don't know who it was, but I know there was this one woman who said, when I saw that guy walk up with the body in his hands, I knew something was real bad here. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen that interview, but you could. This woman doesn't seem like she has any secondary gain to put these people down for. So they concoct this story. It gets a lot of publicity. The disabled son is, complicit and goes along with whatever he's told. And it becomes an ongoing mystery forever. But, I just can't quite figure out how the son was never implicated. It would make such perfect sense. Dad abuses son abuses JonBenet, JonBenet freaks out, limited son freaks out and tries to silence her in some way. She dies. He runs to father, says, I just was doing what you do to me. Dad freaks out. They get the kid to go by a certain story, and they stash the kid in the basement, call the authorities, and he comes walking up. That's the most unlikely thing, because if the criminal is rarely going to want to implicate themselves by carrying a dead body, but that's a pretty smart strategy. Oh, I'll be the one to go down there and carry up the body. Well, I would never do that if I was trying to hide something, right? It's a perfect excuse. So that's what I think happened. I think that the son murdered her, perhaps accidentally. I'm not certain that it was an act of malice, but I think when she would have protested, he would have just tried to quiet her. But being so limited, he didn't put it together that, well, if I put my hands over her nose and mouth, or if I grab her by the neck, or whatever the hell happened, she'll just be quiet. No, she'll be dead. That's what happened. So that's it. Keep it simple. It seems that way to me. Who's responsible? They all fucking are, except of course JonBenet. But that's how incestuous families operate. It's like a mini organized crime system. And oftentimes I will say that power is one of the factors that keeps everybody quiet, but it isn't always. Or sometimes it isn't the perpetrator that has all the power. It sometimes is the non-offending spouse that has a lot of power, that doesn't want it getting out. It could be any of them, but I'm saying that when you watch how that family dances around the whole issue, and the whole notion of the guy carrying the body up from the basement, oh, look what I found, a dead body, it's my daughter, oh gee whiz, and then you see this kid interviewed when he's young, and then see him interviewed when he's older, but he hasn't changed a bit, except he's gotten taller or bigger, but his intellectual capabilities are exactly the same. So with all that being said, that's what's inside the world of MACK'S Headroom about the JonBenet Ramsey narrative. And put your comments put your comments in the comment section below, and we'll see. Does it sound crazy what I'm saying? I don't think it sounds so crazy really, but who knows? I'm crazy anyway, so it don't really matter. Well, thanks again. I've really had fun doing this, and thank you for listening. So, once again, this has been another episode of Inside the Heretical World of MACK'S Headroom. Thank you very much. Oops.